Welcome to Getting Your Ducks in a Row. I'm Jason Windle, and today I'm joined by Jonathan Gammon, a chartered civil engineer and chartered geologist with an incredible 40-year career spanning the globe. Jonathan has worked on some of the world's most complex infrastructure projects, from tunnelling and high-rise construction in Hong Kong to leading ground investigations for HS2. Now a non-executive director at Geotechnical Observations, he's an expert in implementation and monitoring, helping ensure structures perform as expected and, most importantly, stay safe. In this episode, we dive into the evolution of geotechnical engineering, the impact of AI and digital technology in construction, and the biggest challenges facing the industry today, including skill shortages and project delays. Jonathan is a fountain of knowledge, and you're going to get a ton of insight from this one. Enjoy. Morning, Jonathan.
Morning. How are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining. I'm actually excited about having you on this, particularly because of your your experience and knowledge in the industry and your sort of your varied background, which we'll drill into as we come on. I just wonder whether we could start with a bit of if you could give us a bit of background on your sort of journey through the industry, where you started, and give us a bit of a feel for how you have ended up where you are now.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much. Well, to start with, I took a degree in civil engineering at the University of Surrey. That was a civil engineering degree and included a year out in industry. I was very fortunate to be able to spend that year out in Switzerland working for Marty Argay, the very large Swiss contractors, on a fabulous project, a bridge over the River Aare north of Bern. So that gave me a real hands-on experience of civil engineering. I finished my degree and then I decided to specialise. I'd come under the spell of two lecturers in soil mechanics, and Noel Simons and Bruce Menzies, and I went to Imperial College and studied the MSc, and 50 years ago this year I graduated from Imperial College, so quite some time ago now.
Congratulations on your anniversary.
Thank you very much. I've made it. Then really specialised. And in those days, to specialise was quite an unusual thing to do. It was generally seen that you should kind of try and keep as broad an involvement with civil engineering as you could. But I was very taken with being involved in geotechnical engineering. I joined W.S. Atkins. The civil engineering, the geotechnical department at that time was 7 or 8 strong. It's now multiples of that, in the hundreds. But these were early days when companies were recognising the need for specialists. And I was very fortunate to be in at that stage. I worked for a number of years in the UK. I became a chartered civil engineer, and then had the opportunity to go overseas with my family. I'd been in the Middle East on various projects by myself, working through Algeria, Egypt, Saudi Arabia and Iran. And that had been a great experience for me, but really from the family's point of view, I was away from home. So we decided as a family to go to Hong Kong. I spent 4 years in Hong Kong working for Fugro there, mainly on projects to do with in high-rise buildings, commercial buildings, that side of things, not on the railway sector, which is the other main area of work, and we'll come back to that. And then had the chance, totally unexpectedly, to go down to New Zealand and work. I've got relatives down there. We'd been to see them. They suggested it would be a good place to go and work. I didn't think jobs would come up, and then suddenly jobs did come up. And 3 of us were recruited to 3 consultancies in New Zealand as a result of some problems they'd had with some of their hydroelectric schemes. And I had a great job there, setting up a specialist team in a large company called Murray North, which is now AECOM. Having gone through various different configurations, and we had a great time there, but there was an economic crisis in 1987, 88, and we came back to the UK, and I rejoined Atkins, and a particularly long story short for you, worked my way through consultancies. I worked for Darl Handasar, the big Middle Eastern consultants, and did a fabulous project out in Qatar, the Ras Al Khaimah port, where I represented the client for the detailed design. And then unexpectedly had the opportunity to go back to Hong Kong and work for Atkins, Atkins China as it became, and took charge of the geotechnical work on what was a huge project called West Rail in those days. That's now part of the Chun Ma line in Hong Kong, but it stood by itself as a system at that time. Was going to be 50 kilometres of railway up to the border with China, but that was cut back to 30 kilometres after the handover, and I was there for the handover in 1997. I took charge of the ground investigation, which was the biggest in Hong Kong that had been, and that was very exciting to do that. And then totally unexpectedly, back on site for 3 years in the role of resident geotechnical engineer to supervise the works on a very large station on the system and also approach tunnels. In 2002 I came back to the UK and then worked for various consultancies, ending up with CH2M, where I started in 2012 and worked for CH2M until I retired in July 2017. Took a deep breath for a year, and then Andrew Ridley, and we'll come back to Andrew because he's the owner and managing director of Geotechnical Observations Limited, which is where I work now part-time. Andrew and I got to know each other at that stage because we needed, Mouchel at the time, needed someone to come in and look at a problem that was occurring on the M25 motorway. Andrew had not just the ability to put the instruments in, but also the ability to think about the problem that was arising and how we might solve it. So that relationship developed, and November 2018 I started work where I am now in a non-executive director and advisor role at Geotechnical Observations Limited, based in Weybridge.
Wow, what a fantastic career you've had.
Yeah, I've been very lucky. I mean, I've been very fortunate. I mean, I've had wonderful teams working for me. I really have. I mean, I spent a couple of years running the ground investigation on HS2. Started off with a team of 14. We never expected to actually continue in the work we were doing, but we were enabled to by the client. And the team grew to 50, divided between a team up in Birmingham and a team up in London to cover the full extent of the phase 1, which is from London to Birmingham on HS2. What a great team. I mean, my role was essentially to relate to the client organisations, to the Department for Transport, Her Majesty's Treasury, to get the funding through. So in a sense, the rest of the team were at the sharp end of actually the technical side of things and getting things sorted out in terms of what became a ground investigation with over 10,000 fieldwork locations required. And when I started out, my very first ground investigation was 1 borehole and 3 trial pits on the Isle of Wight at Core Abbey in 1976.
Wow.
So things can move on. If you like.
Well, I mean, just listening to you there and talk about the variety of work and projects and, you know, different locations you've been to, everything you've been involved in. What would you say to someone that's perhaps thinking about a career, say they're in college or university or whatever, and they're thinking to themselves, you know what, that sounds really interesting to me, I'd love to get into something like that. What would you say is the key, do you think, in your experience, to being able to have such a varied career and access to so many great projects and opportunities? I mean, expertise, of course, right? You know, you need to be very good at what you're doing. And I imagine that's taken as a given. But what else is there, do you think, to unlocking that?
No, good question. I mean, I think one of the things is that all projects have place some demand on the ground, whether it's and even with a tethered balloon is putting a load on the ground if you want to keep that balloon in place. So people sometimes say to me, well, something up in the sky is nothing to do with the ground. Well, it can be. So all projects in some way, shape or form interact with the ground, and that means then if you're into ground engineering, you can actually be involved in a huge range of different types of projects. But going back to the sort of basics, in a sense, of civil engineering, it's got really, really exciting now. I think the opportunities in civil engineering, at one time you might see yourself designing reinforced concrete or designing steel or maybe designing some foundations and that sort of thing, but there are now opportunities with the way that AI is impacting on what we're doing for young people whose minds are really possibly not focused so much on, say, the reinforced concrete and the steel, but there are other dimensions of work. And to get into civil engineering, you can go through all sorts of different paths. I mean, the apprenticeship schemes now are getting, as they should be, getting a lot of attention. I think that's a great way to get into civil engineering. Mix your academic study with practical hands-on experience. And I'm hoping that apprenticeship scheme, gathers a lot more momentum than perhaps it has done in the past. But really, there are global opportunities, and I mean, I was very fortunate that at the time my career was developing, that there was almost a tried and tested route. UK, Middle East, Far East, and then after that you might go down to the Antipodes, and Australia, New Zealand, or you might go to Canada, and then work your way back to the UK. So that there are all sorts of opportunities. They're perhaps not as great as they used to be, but they're there for those that really want to grab them. And you hear a lot of young people talking about realizing your dream, and I think that's the thing to do, is to have the aspirations of getting involved, and there are all sorts of roles in civil engineering for young people. As I say, you can be involved in the design side of things. You can be involved in my area of work, in ground investigation. You can be involved in the laboratory testing as a technician in a laboratory. We have technicians in our company who are involved with what we're doing. We have people who are making the instruments for us, that sort of thing. And there's a lot of attention being focused now very much on education, training and qualifications. And that's something, when I set up the Instrumentation and Monitoring Working Group at the Association of Geotechnical and Geo-Environmental Specialists, AGS, that was very much a focal point for us, was to look at opportunities for someone's skills to be recognised. There's the sort of tried and tested becoming, getting a degree, going on and becoming chartered. I'm a chartered geologist as well, so I'm very fortunate to have a foot in that camp as well. But that's not necessarily where people need to be aiming. There are technician roles, there are incorporated engineer roles. Really, if you want to have your skills recognised and you want to enjoy what you're doing, and I think that's what I've got really lots out of from my career, there really are great opportunities. So you may not see yourself as the next person who's going to be designing, say, the Burj Khalifa, but there are other roles involved in doing that, and extremely valuable. We really do value our technicians hugely. There's some great career paths for technologists now. In our area of work, we're looking at that. There's government, there's a mandatory process in place through what are called British standards, which mean that we have to have staff who are able to prove their competencies, and one way of doing that is to have a qualification, and that's something that we're looking at very earnestly, both as a working group at AGS but also across the profession.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a few things you mentioned there, one which being the variety that is available within the industry. And I think that's a common theme that we've experienced from speaking to people and just being, working in it. That once you've applied your trade, whether that be in a trade or whether you're going to get a degree or whatever sort of whatever route you choose into the sector, there is so much. Once you're in and you've completed your initiation or whatever you want to call it, there is so much available, and there are so many routes, specialisms, whatever it is available, that I defy anyone to come into it and not find something that suits them and something that they're interested in. Particularly, I think, as you touched on there, Jonathan, modern technology coming into the sector now, and what that is, the opportunities that's bringing about for people, and it rings true to me what you say there about the variety, and I think that's a very key point, and certainly why it should certainly be an industry that people are considering a career in.
I mean, there are different skills that need to be applied now, and skills that may not have been recognised in the past that individuals have. They have a talent in a particular area which, now we need to have, and there's an opportunity. And let's not forget about the folk, at the sharp end of construction, the contractors, the folk out on site, the trades, people with trades. We desperately need more people who are able to lay bricks and able to fix formwork and that sort of thing, and they are valuable roles to have on a project. So for those that may not be seeing themselves sat in an office and would rather be outside doing things and want to use their hands to form something, and I think as most of us as civil engineers have really seen that as our goal. When I first thought about doing civil engineering when I was about 12 or 13 years old, it was really to be constructing things, to actually get involved in forming something, and to be part of a project.
Well, the thing with that is, and I was having this conversation with another guest who's an architect, and we were talking about the digital world as it is today, specifically talking about screens, right? Yeah. Everyone lives their life through their mobile computer or whatever, and a lot of the younger generation, it's just that's what they know, right? That's what they're brought up with, and that's how they interact a lot, and that's a lot where their world is based.
Yes.
But there's a lot to be said, and we have this in the design side that that we do, and the services that we offer. There's a lot to be said for creating something that you can touch and feel as tangible, and being able to say, walk down the road and there's a building or whatever. I did that.
Yes.
You can walk up to it. It's there. It's real.
Yes.
And I think that's been lost a bit. And I think that it's something that there's so much satisfaction that comes from that.
Yeah, definitely, very, very much so, at all sorts of scales. No, you're absolutely right. Very, very, very much the case.
Just looking at your current role, so you're a non-executive director. What is that, and what does a person who's a non-exec director do?
Right, okay, well, it means that I don't have any equity in the company, and that's usually the distinguishing feature. It's someone who can genuinely be seen to be independent of those sorts of pressures. It's a nudging role. I mean, the word advisor's there as well to kind of underline that particular dimension to my particular role, and there'll be non-executive directors who have a different role in the lives of companies. And it's really to be able to listen to what the management team are proposing to do, what their plans are, and to sort of query where it's sensible to do so, what's being done, should we invest in this area of activity or that area of activity, what's our offering, how do we promote our offering better. It's an excellent role. I mean, it's very part-time. I'm very fortunate to have the role that I have. I think really Andrew really wanted me to join the company because of the experience I have working for large companies, directly for consultants, but also with contractors through being with a consultancy, and going way back to that early part of my career. So there's that introduction to projects, introduction to individuals, people who care about instrumentation and monitoring in the client organisations, and a lot of our clients are the contractors, and we really do make sure that we relate to them as best we can, and that we can provide them with the service that they're seeking.
Okay. What motivated you to take on this role? You've had a great career, lots of experience. You should be on a beach, golf course, I don't know, whatever your, hobbies are. Why take this role after such a great career?
No, it's a great question, and when I retired from CH2M, various people said to me, "Oh, you'll come back on Monday as a consultant." I said, "No, I won't be doing that." Various people said to me, "You're going to go off and become an expert witness on dispute cases." Now, I've been very fortunate. I've had some super roles in some very tricky dispute situations. I've had a super role in a not so tricky dispute situation, but a public inquiry for the Northern Line extension, where I was actually the expert witness for all the engineering aspects of that project, and that did get through the Transport and Works Act order process. Thanks very much to an excellent inspector, it has to be said, who presided over the proceedings brilliantly, so I'd sort of been involved in that side of things, but I've just felt that really I wasn't wanting to commit my time, and actually not so much my time, because I wouldn't have control of it. One of the problems, in a sense, of being an expert witness is that you never know when the cases are going to come to the fore, when there might be a change of plan and all that sort of thing. And I think, in fairness to my wife, who retired before I did, for me to appear over the horizon retired and then to be having to mess around with our holidays and what she'd like to do really wasn't on. But having said that, after about a year of being retired, our older daughter had come back from overseas and was working in the UK again. I was wondering what I might do next. So not as a consultant, going back to CH2M, or CH2M then became Jacobs, and not really setting up a consultancy firm. I admire people who've done that. I've never had the courage to actually do my own thing, and I admire people who do that, I have to say. In good fortune, because, as I say, I've known Andrew since, it'll be 2001, 2000. The company has its 25th anniversary this year, so very soon after the company had been formed. And my instrumentation and monitoring dimension had come about because when I came back from Hong Kong in 2002, I was very fortunate to join the advisory board of EMAP, who run a lot of the conferences, in fact the main conferences, I think we could argue, in the UK in the construction sector, and certainly in ground engineering. And I was on their advisory board, and I kept saying, because I've fallen under the spell of John Dunnicliffe, the late John Dunnicliffe, sadly, who is the guru, international guru of instrumentation monitoring, and he and I worked together on West Rail in Hong Kong. So I come under his spell. I was involved a lot with instrumentation and monitoring on my project. We had a lot of things to worry about that might be upset by what we were doing. And so I kept saying, look, I really, really would like to have instrumentation monitoring on your calendar. And they said, well, I don't know. In the end, they gave in. I was being such a nuisance to them. They gave in and said, okay, Jonathan, we will introduce this conference. You can chair it. Tell us who the speakers should be and attract the exhibitors, and we'll see how it goes. And thank goodness, thanks to the industry, not to me, thanks to the industry, people like Andrew and others, companies that were desperate to show off what was going on from a technology point of view, because the advances have been huge and they've been strides in technology. And so for 10 years I chaired that conference, and so I have had this great interest in instrumentation monitoring for a long time. I have a diagram which I call the geo wheel, which has the instrumentation monitoring at its hub, just to show that it interacts with everything else that's going on around it. And it's not a contrivance, because I actually put that together before I was getting very involved in instrumentation monitoring, but it's a lucky dimension, as it were, of that diagram. So really, when Andrew asked me if I would be happy to join him and help in the way that he wanted me to, I was very, very, very pleased to be asked, and have enjoyed the opportunity to do that.
Wow. So when did you start that role? 2018?
Yes, November 2018, yes.
Okay. So you've been there for, blimey, 5, 6, 7 years?
Yes. Nearly.
Nearly 7 years. So Geotechnical started, as you say, 25 years ago, right? It started in 2000.
Yes.
Appreciate you've only sort of been there for 7 years of that, but how would you say the company's evolved over the years, and what sort of core values have remained consistent in that time?
Right. Well, essentially the company's a provider of specialist monitoring solutions. And by that we mean right across from the start to the finish of the whole process. And so from the start, we've got our own workshop, we make our own instruments. Andrew's developed particular instruments. So we have a workshop. We have instruments that we make, we have instruments that we bring in from other companies. We act as a distributor, so from very smart bits of kit that come in from Canada and from other locations, shape arrays that come in from Canada, and they owe their origins to the computer generated industry, the film industry, which is just an example of how technology just flips across from one area to another, and that's the wonderful nature of it. So we've got that role. We install instruments and we make sure we put them in properly, and we do that correctly. And then we carry out the monitoring. That might be manual monitoring. There's a lot more remote sensing, remote transmitting of data now. So, the days of when I was on site in Hong Kong, we had cables going everywhere. And did they get cut? Yes, they did get cut. And did we have to repair them? We did. Whereas now a huge amount of data is transmitted wirelessly, which is a brilliant breakthrough. And that data then has to be collected. We have a software system called Geodesy, which takes that data. And in fact, you could argue that data in itself doesn't mean very much. It's got to become information. It's got to become something meaningful for people who want to understand what's going on. So we have this Geodesy software that undertakes that aspect of what we do, and provides clients with the data. We've got some dashboards, information, and that sort of thing. And luckily, in keeping with what we're doing from a technology point of view, on sites now there's a lot of filming goes on. The days of the guys going out with the pencil and paper and writing down what's going on. There's a lot of really good software that contractors are using to track what's going on. So if something untoward, something unexpected happens, and our instruments pick that up, then we can often track back what's going on. So we have a consultancy role as well. We're very happy to provide guidance to those who are seeking an instrumentation monitoring system, and would like to know what's the best instrumentation to use. And you have to be very careful. I like to, there are instruments now that can provide data about movements. Let's just talk about movements. And what are we doing in instrumentation monitoring? We're basically looking at the predictions that people have made about how the ground might behave, or a structure might behave, or how a neighbouring asset like a tunnel or even a cable, a pipeline or something like that behaves. And what we're doing with instrumentation monitoring is we're providing that critical link between prediction and reality. Now, the people that do the predictions don't like being told their predictions are wrong. And sometimes we get into situations where we're accused of being wrong in our instrumentation data, that there's got to be something going wrong with the instruments and or the data processing or something. And I'm afraid to say that we're very fortunate with the way in which we go about our work, the care we take, that we can demonstrate that actually what we've done on our side of that particular arrangement between prediction and reality is right, and you need to go back and look at your predictions and rethink what's going on. But at the same time, instruments are capable now of producing a huge amount of data. I mean, in the extreme, a tunnel boring machine produces something like 3,000 items of data a second. Massively heavy system that's churning its way through the ground. And they go to data centers in France, with one particular company's instance, and it gets analysed, and AI is very heavily involved with that. But just because you can produce that much data doesn't mean to say that you should. And we have instances where the client will say to us, well, how often can you monitor what's going on with my retaining wall? And we can say, well, you can have it every minute if you want.
Yeah.
And their eyes light up and say yes. And we go, no. I mean, I try and draw this analogy with a car. Just because you... because your car can go at 120 miles an hour doesn't mean to say that you should actually go at that speed. You've got to do what is sensible, and you've got to do what keeps the situation safe. And if you have, and of course there's some mandatory process in the background with cars, but no, the analogy is there that this device is capable of performing in this way, but actually what's best for it, what do you actually really need from it, and that's something that we have to educate clients, because as the data churns out, it's going to fill up their IT systems. And in the early days, when instrumentation monitoring was gathering momentum, I would talk to clients and say, look, this is the amount of storage you're going to need on your IT system, and their eyes would pop out of their heads. And I'd say, yeah, absolutely. We can reduce it to what's absolutely needed. But if movement starts to occur, we may need to increase the frequency of monitoring, which is what usually happens. And in that case, you are going to need to have this sort of capacity. So these things need to go hands in glove. And I mean, I think the big steps have been the ability of systems to be able to accommodate that data. At one time, and this was a difficulty that instrumentation monitoring had in the early days, as it were, or when it was being used on big projects, was that there weren't the people. There wasn't the time available to go through that data. Now with AI and the processes that we've got now, that data can be interrogated, and if there's anything untoward going on, we can detect it.
Where do you think the balance is between sort of more traditional methods and the introduction and usefulness of technology? And I'll give you an example to sort of frame it. I remember seeing something on, it might have been LinkedIn or some social platform, where a surveyor had been called out to a large commercial building. There were some photos of it. It was quite difficult to see exactly what it was, but in short, it was a big commercial, probably like some sort of industrial building, right? And there was some sort of project, I don't know if it's a redevelopment or there was something going on there. And they had sent in, they'd done a sort of a survey on it using technology, so specifically drone footage to look at the roof of this building. And the report had come back and basically said that structurally it was fine, and that they could proceed to whatever it is they want to do. I mean, I'm sort of shortening the thing here, right? But that's essentially what was said. And I don't actually know why, but this person who had posted this was asked to go in person to inspect it, to properly go around it, touch it, feel it, and all the rest of it. And he'd found that there was what looked like a pillar in the middle of this building that went all the way from the foundations up to the roof. And where it was exposed on the roof to the elements, it looked from a distance absolutely fine. But on closer inspection, when you're there and you can touch it and feel it, the concrete, so the integrity of the concrete, completely gone, it's completely shot. Right. And it had basically, the pillar itself, because of this, was completely, I mean, it was dangerous, basically. So the project, it was all changed. They had to knock the building down, basically, rebuild it and all the rest of it. But it just struck me as, there is a thirst for innovation, modern technology, efficiency. But I think there is a balance also as well between that and traditional methods. And where do you think that balance is, if there is one? No,
absolutely right. I mean, there is still a place for what you might call conventional surveying. Measuring movements, and by having what we call a monument, a device on the ground, a stud on the ground or something like that, there is a place for that continual manual monitoring. And some locations it's very difficult to get instruments. If you've got line of sight problems and all that sort of thing, then you might need to be looking at a different type of system. But yeah, you've really got, I mean, I think we're fortunate that we have this very, very wide-ranging palette of techniques that go from that manual survey, someone with a dumpy level, looking at settlements that are occurring over a period of time, right through to satellite monitoring and remote sensing. We've got you mentioned drones. Yeah, drones are being used a tremendous amount now to avoid risky surveying, say, of rock faces, of cliff faces, and that sort of thing. The technology now can take the photogrammetry that a drone provides and translate that into the behaviour of these slopes, which is absolutely fantastic. But the satellite monitoring, and that's not an area that we're directly involved with, but we see the value of it without any doubt at all. Satellite monitoring, the ability now to monitor millimetre movements of the ground from space, but also to be able to go back in time. I always say that one of the benefits of the satellite monitoring is these satellites have been collecting this data and they've got no idea why this data has been collected, because that's not the way they're thinking. But actually, if you have a project and you notice there's some ground movement occurring and you think maybe that was occurring before I started on this project, and I'd like to know, because someone's going to start pointing a finger at me and telling me that I've actually caused that problem, and I'd actually like to know whether I have or how I haven't. And I've advised clients to go back, get the satellite data. There's a number of companies that are very, very good at this. Pick up the data, see what happened beforehand. So, you know, you can do that historical desk studies side of things, but at the same time, I put up a slide showing the route of the tunnels on Crossrail, which is now the Elizabeth line, and it shows the line of where the tunnels were going to be. Then I put up another slide, and there's this red line, two red lines that are working their way across London, and I say, can you actually notice the similarity between this first drawing and this next illustration? And they go, yes. And I say, well, those red lines are what the satellite was picking up as those tunnel boring machines worked across London. Millimetre movement of the ground surface that didn't upset things at all, but that the satellite was able to pick up. And some areas where, as a result of some dewatering that was going on, actually showed that there were some increased settlements occurring. So it was not just to do with the tunnelling, there were other activities going on that influenced the ground surface behaviour. So, you know, isn't that a huge, you know, going that huge range of technologies that we have, right from the very basic, which, as you're saying, we still need to hold on to, we need to adhere to, because that will have certain advantages in certain situations, right through to something that's out in outer space and looking down on us and what we're doing. And that approach is being used more and more now. And same with the data. I mean, we could be monitoring a project in Hong Kong and the data comes through on our phones.
Yeah, wow.
So it is extraordinary what can be done these days.
Well, I mean, again, just to sort of, I think it reinforces, excuse the pun, the the point that we made at the start of this, which is there is a hell of a lot of variety and opportunity.
Yes.
And it's from the ground up, right?
Yes.
You know, it really is. It's from more traditional methods, which are still valuable and needed, right up to, you know, your cutting edge satellite measuring millimeters of, you know, ground movement. It's it's impressive. So just looking at sort of the future of engineering and the sort of construction sector as a whole as well, and I'd like to get you've got a lot of experience and knowledge, and it's been fantastic hearing about everything that you've been doing and all of that, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this or housing crisis as it's being portrayed, and these £1.5 million homes that we need to build, and all of the issues. You know, there's some well-rehearsed issues that most of the industry will be aware of. We've got a skills shortage that we mentioned. Material costs are through the roof. I think we've got some regulatory issues and reform that needs doing. But if you could, you know, just that specifically, what are your thoughts in relation to that, and what do you think is needed to be able to come close to meeting that target?
Well, on the housing side of things, I must say we don't get very involved in instrumentation monitoring on housing projects. There have been some housing projects that could well have done with some instrumentation monitoring to see what's going on. But one needs to be able to look at outside one's immediate area of work, obviously. And I think the housing sector, you know, is one of great promise for the construction sector. I mean, obviously, for the house builders, it's really good news. I think the processes are being accelerated. You know, our local newspaper has far more applications for housing developments in its pages now than it ever had. And also those applications being approved, not all of them, but the majority of them are getting approved. So there is this momentum gathering in the housing sector, and thank goodness, because we need, that we have a shortage of tradespeople. I mentioned the value of trades, bricklaying, plumbing, electricity, whatever, and I think those are going to be coming in even greater demand. If a young person is looking at some way of getting involved in what's going on in the construction, the building sector, that would be certainly a great place to apply their talent. But I think if you then move on to the outside the housing sector, if I may, and look at other types of projects that are being put forward, the big issue that we have is it's a pedestrian process here in the UK. I think there's a recognition that we're taking far too long to do things, taking far too long. I was listening about how a hospital refurbishment is going to take 3 or 4 years. It really is extraordinary. But when you then look at the bigger projects, say the projects that we need of the day, even the Sizewell C project, we're very fortunate as a company. We've had a team on Hinckley C monitoring both the formation works and also the tunnelling work that's going on for a number of years. So we're very, very fortunate to be involved with that project. We like to be involved with Sizewell C. I've actually went up onto the site and was involved in the very early days of some of the design work there. So you've got that nuclear sector, small modular reactors, possibly coming over the horizon. Then you've got the Lower Thames Crossing, where a decision still hasn't been made yet. I think it's May that it's due to be made about the Lower Thames Crossing as to whether that's going to happen. And some of these contracts are being awarded, and the contractors must be beside themselves. They really must be, because you can't hold people sitting, you can't have people sat in offices doing nothing. You've got plant that you've invested in, because you've got to get that in place before you start the work. And that's where the HS2 cancellation is devastating, because we haven't had in recent times, before HS2, a particularly long history of doing major earthworks. In my early career, we were building the M11. We were doing all sorts. We were forming the missing link between Maidstone and Ashford, that terrible bit of the A20 as it used to be. Yeah. We were doing those sorts of projects, and so there were big earth moving operations and that sort of thing going on. HS2's brought that back, but then the contractors have invested in all this plant. I see the reservoirs as being the next place for them to go, and I'm sure they're looking at that too, because they are generally earth dams, so they're the same sorts of technique. You have to be a bit more careful, and there's luckily a lot of instrumentation and monitoring involved in earth dams. But we worked on the research work on HS2, looking at the trial cuttings and the trial embankments, and that kind of experience is particularly important when it comes to putting large earth dams on top of the ground surface and forming cuttings and so on. So there's some promise there, but these projects are still very, very slow. They're being talked about, they've been planned. I mean, Havant is happening, some others are starting to happen, but we do seem to accommodate very long construction programs. And I think there are people in government earnestly looking at this whole process and trying to see where we might speed things up. We all want to, as in the construction sector, we really want to get on with things. Yeah. And on all sorts of scales. So you've mentioned housing, absolutely right. Let's get going on that. And right through to the large, if you like, the projects like Lower Thames Crossing, like Sizewell C, other projects that are involved in helping to improve the economy and so on.
Yeah, I think it's a common theme, right? And I think it's a well-rehearsed point that, there's so much. I think there's quite a fair amount of reform that needs to happen. Regardless of, it's good to set targets, right? It's great, it's good to have a goal, but just setting that all aside, I just think for the prosperity of the industry and the economy, because construction as a whole is one of the kingpins of the economy, right? Yeah. And it really is. My granddad always used to say to me, if you see the cranes up, the economy's going well. And I think that's always a good barometer, right? But I think that regardless of whether it's housing, whatever sort of industry you're in, it needs improvement, because it's just far, far, far too slow, and far too much time, resource, money, whatever, is wasted because of the processes that we have in place. I understand that there is a balance that needs to be struck between, the contractor or whatever who wants to get going and wants to, crack on and all the rest of it, and the other side of that, which is making sure everything's safe, making sure it's right, and all the rest of it. And there's always a balance to be struck there, but for me, it's far too heavily weighted to the the sorting of everything before we actually start doing the work.
Yeah, no, indeed. No, absolutely. I mean, sustainability, absolutely critical, vitally important, and there are a lot of people very earnestly applying themselves to that, which is great. And I think they're seeing, the contractors are working so hard. I know on, for example, the Lower Thames Crossing, the contractors have sat down and the extraordinary amount of carbon saving they've been able to generate prior to getting onto site, but just looking at the way they're going about doing things. So, you've got that sustainability, you've got environmental monitoring. We don't do environmental monitoring. If we were, we'd engage with companies like, say, South Downs Environmental, Rick Meadows and his team in South Downs for that environmental side of the monitoring, which is very important. So one needs to look at those different areas, the concerns for global warming, what that means. I've been interacting with staff at RSK who are doing a project with Syria, the research body in the UK, looking at what needs to be done, what do we need to be looking at in specific terms, in terms of what the ground related issues are in the context of global warming and what that might mean. And I bought them silly by telling them that in 1992 I actually took part in a conference about and it was called actually engineering in the engineering in the face of climatic change, and even at that time some people were starting to worry themselves about this issue. Not that many, but of course now understandably there is that attention being paid to it. Yes, engineering in the uncertainty of climatic change, that was what it was called. Became a book, and lots of those issues to do with the intensity of the rainfall, the extremes in temperatures and all that kind of thing, they are now staring us in the face, and we need to be aware of them. So yeah, it's a difficult process because there are all these issues that now need to be considered. But as you're saying, we need to speed the process up. There's no doubt about that. Find some way in getting a project started as quickly as we can. And certainly the reservoir projects, we've had housing development, to go back to that point you were making about the importance of housing. We had housing development stalled in where I am in West Sussex because of the water supply issues. Now that shouldn't be the case in the present day. And reservoirs that were abandoned, plans for reservoirs that were abandoned decades ago really should have happened because we wouldn't be facing these problems now. So we need to have the strength of our convictions, and I think that is where I got very upset about HS2 being cancelled, partly because I was so involved with the project in its early days, but also because it showed that we don't have the courage we had, even as recently as Crossrail, as the Elizabeth line, which went through this, it's a white elephant, it's far too expensive, it's taking far too long. People didn't really appreciate. We did the civil engineering pretty smartly, pretty quickly, without really any serious issues, but then the poor folk who were involved in the systems, the signalling and all sorts of, that technology moves on at a pace and you've just got to keep up with it. So, but we kept our nerve, and it's now the most used part of the London Underground and people love it. But we kept our nerve, and we seem to have lost that ability to keep our nerve. And I know there were some huge money numbers involved, so one has to tread very carefully. I accept that, but it doesn't quite say it doesn't convey the right message. In Spain, when the economy was not looking great, and the contractors were really looking in a very difficult place, the government spent a huge amount of money on introducing a high-speed rail system, which in fact is more extensive than in France. And those contractors gathered that experience, and then they've translated it, and they've gone global. And there are Spanish contractors who've undertaken some very major projects here in the UK, very much on the back of the experience they gained in their home country, being given the opportunity by government to get that experience on board. So, there are ways and means of doing it, but you've got to have the strength of your convictions and really keep your heads down. And poor old Brunel back in those days, he had the same problems. He kept his nerve, and look what we've benefited from as a result of the work that he and others at that time did.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I completely agree with you there. The strength of your convictions to see things through. I think one of the problems with that perhaps is because things are taking too long. It's giving people too much time cost is the thing, right? The longer things go on, the more things cost, and it's giving people too much time to sort of meddle in the detail of things. I think sometimes, you have to commit to something. Obviously, we've got some fantastic people working in some great industries in this country, and who have expertise and knowledge, who plan these things, people that initiate them, and we need to trust that and move forward and stick to what we say we're going to do, and not worry too much about, I say, devil's in the detail. I mean, you wouldn't agree with me there because you're a details man, but that principle of, I think, as you said, to sum it up, I suppose, is holding your nerve and seeing it through.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, let's take an example. Let's go back in history. Now, this is now, the first train, Stockton to Darlington, 200 years ago. Okay, first ran as a passenger service. If you then look at the dates of when the stations started appearing around the perimeter of London, and we're talking 10, 15, 20, that's extraordinary. So the very first passenger service, Stockton to Darlington, 1825. By the time you're getting into the 1830s, people are starting to run tracks across the UK like crazy.
Yeah.
And these stations are appearing in London. I give a talk about the influence of geology on London Underground's railways. And one of my opening slides is showing why the underground system developed, because the stations ended up around the perimeter of London and people wanted to get across London, in broad terms. But I then also put the dates up when those stations started to appear on the perimeter of London, and it is staggering. And so back in that time, and people did object. There was an awful lot of objections. There was some fantastically big physical issues to get over in building these railways. So yeah, it's very easy for me, isn't it, to sort of relate back to those times. But I think we need to, in some ways, really reflect on that and
Absolutely.
say, look, it was possible. When you've got the strength, you can. When there's the need, and let's face it, there was the need, because the canal system was not going to provide the amount of transport that the country needed as a whole. Something had to change. The vehicles, the roads weren't up for it. So the railway system was the saviour, and so we need to think about, well, what's our saviour? Energy, nuclear power stations, small nuclear reactors, wind farms. I think that same mindset of what do we desperately need to have in, as a society, and let's get on with it. So I'm encouraging young people to go into this as a career, because I give a careers talk at our local sixth form college, and a few years ago when HS2 was full steam ahead, it was an easy sell. I could talk about HS2. And the fact that, because COVID was in our recent memory at that time, and I was saying, look. We carried on working during COVID. The construction sector kept going. If you wanted to keep in a job and actually carry on with your career and develop not have a 2-year hiatus, a gap in your career, then you would be in the construction sector. So there was that dimension. There was also the dimension of HS2. So imagine 12 months later, HS2's been cancelled. Much more difficult sell. But what you've got to do then is actually appeal from a technology. Look at other projects that are coming up, just basically grin and bear the fact that HS2 isn't providing that opportunity. There are going to be other opportunities as well.
Yeah.
But it's a very good, I mean, I just enjoy interacting with young people. I'm a STEM ambassador. I don't do enough of that. I ought to do more. But giving those careers talk and going along to meetings. I mean, I must admit, I tend to sit in on a lot of meetings now remotely. But if I can, I'll get up to London. I'm involved in conferences, and I just really enjoy that. And it's interesting because engaging young people in there are a lot of organisations now that are suffering because young people are not coming into them.
Absolutely.
We have groups of retirees. So you've got Probus, you've got Rotary, I've got a group of friends. We were all in round table together. We aren't affiliated with anything anymore, but we just get together once a month as a group of friends and that sort of thing. But it's very difficult to get young people engaged. I remember going as a student and as a young graduate, going to the Institute of Civil Engineers, and these were the heroes of the hour, these people. And I'm not just talking about geotechnical engineering. I'm talking about people who were heading up major consultancies, Freeman Fox and Partners back in the day. The suspension bridges they would, and you could talk to these people like they're really human and And what's wonderful is that they actually demonstrated their interest in what I was doing, and I thought that was really special because these guys have got so many other things to worry about. And you know, I always remember when I was in Atkins as a graduate engineer, and I was working late one evening, as we tended to in those days. And a chief engineer came over, and now these were the hallowed beings of the place. You know, in those days, you had to be over 30 to be a chief engineer in those days. And he came over and asked me what I was doing, and was very interested in what I was up to, and it was just great to just feel that someone like that was showing a genuine interest. And I'm worried that there are groups being formed now, early careers groups that are being formed in the British Geotechnical Association, AGS, and so on. That's great for young people to be able to come together and share their experiences, and obviously they've got a lot of energy, which is what you have when you're younger, and to be able to do things that might be constrained by we older folk. But I want to make sure that that doesn't create two separate camps.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Jonathan, I you know, thank you for sharing everything that you've been able to share today. I could honestly talk to you for hours. You're a fountain of knowledge. Well, I know for a fact anyway that people listening to this will take a hell of a lot of value out of it. Whether they're thinking about starting, whether they're in the industry, whatever, it's been fascinating to listen to you speak and hear about your career. So thank you. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope we speak again soon. I'm sure we will.
Thank you very much. I mean, you know, from all sorts of points of view, and from, you know, our sector as a whole, I'm very grateful I've had this chance to talk to you and to take part in your podcast. Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers, Jonathan.